Welcome back to the Pathfinders podcast, where we dive into the career journeys of great people with exciting paths. Our conversation will align with the Pathfinders methodology and hit on the career maps of our guests, a representation of their professional journeys along the way, past, present, and future. And we'll break these out into skills, roles, jobs, accomplishments, some of the education, and fun stuff as it makes sense. The cool part about this is we're actually going to talk about the multiple mentors and the people that helped guide them along the way, some of their personal board of advisors. You might hear us call this the PBA. We'll share these on LinkedIn and the podcast platform, so be sure to follow us and share your thoughts in the comments as you listen along the way. The favorite quote for our guest, and you'll hear it a couple of different times throughout the show: "Don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing." Ron Swanson. Very wise words from Sarah Reynolds. They, them is a creative, award-winning marketing executive and advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. A veteran of the HR software market, Sarah is currently Chief Marketing Officer at HiBob, where they bring their deep industry knowledge, passion for storytelling, and keen eye for performance insights to bear in scaling HiBob's global reach. It's pretty impressive. That was off script, but I gotta tell you, you gotta check out HiBob. A proud champion of inclusive, people-centric growth strategies, Sarah has a strong track record of delivering transformative results. Get ready to dive in with Sarah from across the pond. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Pete. Thank you for having me. It's nighttime here in London, England, but I could not be more excited to be chatting with you about this topic, which really sort of changed the way that I think about career advisory.
Thank you very much. And if you're just listening and not following on YouTube right now, Sarah has the biggest smile on her face right now. So the excitement is true. And we're going to go ahead and dive in to everything. And so the way that this starts, Sarah, is we begin thinking about and sharing growing up. What'd you want to be?
I think that there's probably a joke about my age, which is, for the record, 21 plus. Thank you for asking. That if you grew up in a certain, yeah, you knew that, right? If you're only experiencing this in a audio medium, it's obvious that I am only 21 plus by the way that I look. Thank you also for asking that. But I think if you grew up at a certain age or a certain time period, everybody wanted to be a marine biologist. And I think that if you were to look back at like what I answered this question with in the second grade, I think that I probably said that I wanted to be a marine biologist as well.
Okay. And did you study marine biology in school?
Heck no.
Tell us more.
I come from a STEM family: science, technology, engineering, and maths. I'm the black sheep. So to give you a sense of the folks that I grew up around, my dad's an electrical engineer. Always grew up sort of surrounded by work colleagues and sort of an adopted family of folks in the engineering industry. My mom went to MIT for bio back in the 80s or so. My sister's a veterinarian, and I made them all very nervous by going to a fancy liberal arts college and studying a combination of history with a focus on like medieval and church history and the like Columbian exchange that happened sort of in the early modern period, and also classical studies, which, if you don't know, is a combination of more history and also some dead languages.
All right. This translates perfectly to Chief Marketing Officer.
Exactly. That's what I'm always telling people.
At some point, you got out of school and you got your first job. Tell us about that. What degrees did you graduate with, maybe, before we get to that first job piece?
I have a Bachelor of Arts.
Okay.
And I actually decided, as my first move coming off of university with this fancy degree, that I would go ahead and make my folks even more nervous that I would be spending the rest of my life living in their basement by enrolling myself in culinary school.
Wow.
So
okay.
I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I, probably transitioned from wanting to be a marine biologist to realizing that my brain is sort of wired for languages and history and loves facts. I love sort of teaching and mentoring. I thought maybe I wanted to be a teacher. I did my degree, and I really found that as much as I loved, thinking about Cicero, or thinking about like church history, or like the sort of food exchange that happened between the quote unquote old world and the quote unquote new world following Columbus. I was actually most interested in like really old cookbooks, and I was most interested in thinking about like what I was cooking for my roommates, or what I could bring to some sort of like upcoming party, and testing my skills in the kitchen rather than thinking about being a teacher. So I thought, hey, I'll go into private chef work. That was actually my first job. Doing private catering and stuff like that, which I loved. I found that culinary school wasn't really for me, for many reasons, including developing a gluten allergy during a baking unit. But I got my start in tech as a bit of an accident, actually. My dad was running a startup at the time, and he had an administrator in his office, his like office manager, go out suddenly on medical leave, and he needed someone to fill in, and he knew my social security number, and he sort of said like, I know that culinary school thing isn't working out for you, kiddo. I need somebody to help me. You start on Monday. And that was my sort of inauspicious start to technology.
And what did you do?
So I was an office administrator to start out with. And one thing that was really interesting in that sort of early job was I got a lot of exposure to the HR side of things, not just because they were a small startup, but also because they were acquired by a large multinational company during the time.
What's so bad? Congratulations.
Yeah, pretty cool. But I got to be sort of like the one of the main touch points on the integration that happens, post M&A activity, between sort of like, what do your HR processes look like now? What does everybody's sort of like comp package look like? What is everybody's like work in office, work from home setup look like? What sort of policies do you have in place? What do you need to add? How do we integrate you post acquisition? Did that for a bit. There wasn't a lot of sort of like continuation of that job because a multinational didn't need them to sort of maintain that person on staff. And I ended up working actually in edtech in the Boston area as sort of my next career path. I moved into being a business development rep, actually.
Okay. So in an admin role into some BD, I feel like you have to cut your teeth on a little bit of sales and rev gen to continue climbing the ladder. What were some of the skills that you took from, actually, let's even rewind, maybe some of the things from culinary school to the first job working with the family into this BD role? What were some of the things you put in your toolbox along those phases?
I think some of the things that it taught me were, culinary school is not about who you are. It's not about where you come from. It is in many ways like a leveling of the playing field. Some of the best cooks I know come from non-traditional backgrounds. And I think that's something that's like so beautiful about the industry. Like whether you're talking about like fair chance hiring programs that focus on folks who've been previously incarcerated and putting them into kitchens and giving them sort of a path forward, or, folks who come from like very traditional sort of like CIA type education, Culinary Institute of America type education, right? Like everybody ends up in kind of the same place, albeit they have different, privileges that they bring with them, and they have different opportunities perhaps along the way. But I think that it sort of taught you that like sometimes the best ideas come from anywhere, and folks can really surprise you. Somebody that you might meet who's quiet and shy is like a whiz kid in the kitchen. Somebody you might meet who is gregarious and great at sales, like many folks that I have the privilege of working with. They're maybe not as great at going home and feeding their family, or vice versa. You might be really great in the kitchen, but you're not a great salesperson. You're not necessarily out there looking for funding, or wanting to run your own restaurant, or wanting to become that like chef type persona that became sort of like the equivalent of a rock star in some arenas. So I think it sort of taught me about like the importance of not maybe judging a book by its cover, and really understanding that genius happens, like talent is like equally distributed in our world, but opportunity is not, I guess I would say.
Well said. So now we're a couple years into the professional space. Were there some people that helped guide you? I know Dad Vaughn told you about the first position or two, but then you probably started to figure out what you liked, what you didn't like, and where you wanted to head next. Who were some of those early guides and mentors, perhaps?
Yeah. I think, like many folks, you lean on your family for some of that initial professional guidance. I know that, by accident or on purpose, I sort of did. Shout out to my dad who wanted to raise me sort of gender neutral before that was really a thing. And, wanted to teach me that, life is about hard work and it's just about, the effort that you put into it and that, the world is a meritocracy. And my dad is also like a 6 foot tall white guy. So maybe his experience of that is a little different than mine. But, somebody who gives good, albeit maybe limited advice based on just our own personal differences. I also think I had the opportunity. I worked at a really small company when I moved into edtech, like think 10 people, and I was in business development. One day, the one person who worked in marketing on our company left, and the CEO kind of walked over to my desk and said, you're not really great at this whole BD thing, but you seem really smart. And I think you can figure this marketing stuff out. And I think that was sort of like my launch pad into marketing. So shout out to the folks who sort of like took a chance on me and said, thinking of maybe about like what now we would call internal talent mobility, not in such a programmatic way when you have 10 employees, but who said, this person isn't necessarily a fit for the role, but is a fit for our company, is a fit for our culture. We think that they can, add value in another area where we have sort of a business gap. And that was sort of it for me. I discovered that I really loved marketing. I discovered that it's like a puzzle in a way that, makes my brain kind of light up. It lets me do a bit of art and a bit of science, which I think is like a nice fit for sort of like my own background. And, I still cook dinner every day. So I guess I get, that benefit as well.
I love it. So moving forward, now we see you're in chief marketing officer role, and you were placed into a marketing role. How did that first marketing position kind of, when did you figure out in that role that this is the place for me to be? Was there a certain project? Was there a certain aha or an accomplishment where you said, this is fun? Did it just click? Did it feel like a flow? Were you really good at it?
I think it was after I sort of left the ed tech industry and I moved into marketing roles in HR tech that I really realized two things. One, I love marketing. I do love the puzzle aspect of it. I went into a type of marketing first as my first sort of specialization in something called demand gen, which is we give you a budget and you give us like the leads and, folks with interest in our, product or our offering. And, the sales team goes out and chases them and tries to convert them into a deal. It was something that like really made my brain sort of light up, as I said. I think I really learned though that like the HR tech market is something that I'm really, really interested in. And so I've worked in a couple of sort of great names in the HR tech space in different parts of marketing. I've also worked outside of HR tech, at different stages of my career. And I think the thing that I really learned is like when you have a passion for the subject matter and you have a passion for the people who work in the industry and you have a passion for the things that you are talking about, if you combine that with a bit of aptitude, hopefully, for marketing, then you really start to find that, you're like spending time thinking about this stuff anyway. You might as well like do it and get paid for it.
It sounds really simple when you say it.
So
like
simple.
Give a little bit of an overview for some of our listeners. Of course, they can come find you on LinkedIn, but some of those companies and brands that you supported along the way on your journey to HiBob.
Yeah. So I first moved into a company called Kronos, which is now called UKG, Ultimate Kronos Group. They merged with Ultimate Software a few years ago after I left the organization. They are a large company. At the time that I worked there, they celebrated $1 billion of revenue. They're now celebrating 4 point something, I think. UKG team, don't kill me for getting it wrong.
They just had to wait for you to leave in order for the explosion
to explode. Yes.
So it's really true. Thank you, Sarah, for the success.
Yeah. So true. So true. But I had a great team working in, as I said, like my first specialized role in marketing, moving from a very small company where you're a generalist, you do everything, to specializing and, understanding what you like, understanding what you don't like. I had a great sort of like early, whether you would call them on your personal board of advisors, like ally, like your collaborative supporting partner, or, even functional mentor. Because when we met, I was very junior to her in the organization. My now friend, Nicole, who sort of took me under her wing and said, like, this is how you do marketing in a big company. Like, I know this is really different than what you have been doing, but, here's what good looks like. I had a great boss who helped along the way as well. And I went from there to a company called salary.com, which was like a really interesting company to work for. They were founded like back in the .com era. They were actually the first place ever on the internet where you could go and look up what you as an employee should get paid. But along the way in their journey, they evolved to being a B2B software company, in addition to having that like B2C offering. And they sold compensation data, software, and analytics for employers. And they'd been sort of like through a series of acquisitions. And when I met them, they actually were a part of IBM. And the original founder of salary.com got together with some private equity money and bought salary.com out of IBM. So they pitched it to me as like, we're a re-startup, and I'd never heard of such a thing, because they were sort of exiting IBM with a book of business, right? An existing set of customers, tens of millions of dollars, definitely like a great name, a great brand, but IBM hadn't made a lot of investments in their product. They hadn't made a lot of investments in sales and marketing. It was much more about sort of like the cash flow for them. And so they wanted to sort of take it back, because the founder said, I'm not done with this journey of my own, and I want to, make this thing something great. I started there in demand generation. They didn't have really a big marketing team at all coming out of IBM. I think we were a marketing team of maybe one or two when I started, and transitioned from there into product marketing, which is the type of marketing that decides, what's your message, what's your positioning to the market, how do you communicate with your customers and speak the language of, what they do and what their pain points are, how do you resonate with them, how do you differentiate your product, right? And I really spent a lot of time, like, again, just taking my love of the industry and learning to use it and learning to apply it and getting to talk to customers and learn, all the intricacies of how you decide what somebody gets paid. If you've never really dove into that, it's like really fascinating work. Another place in the organization that's a great blend of art and science. But I think it really taught me a lot. It really sort of like gave me a focus in my own work on why pay equity is so important, especially for folks who are, underrepresented or traditionally marginalized. It's such an important topic. And it left me with just a really great experience of sort of transitioning from one type of marketing to another type of marketing to really grow and build my skill set.
Before we get into the next step after the salary.com restartup, you've mentioned equity, pay equity, and everybody kind of being able to flourish in their own way in the workplace. Can you talk a little bit more about why that's so important to you and what that really means to you? Let's give that some space and some time here.
Sure. So you said in my intro that my pronouns are they and them. They are. I am an openly non-binary executive. I also identify as queer and disabled. And as somebody who doesn't necessarily fit the mold of what like traditional executive presence maybe has been characterized to look like, I really believe that like there's no one way that you do leadership. There's no one way that you are great at your job. There's no one authentic self at work that works for everyone. And we should be creating, workplaces where folks are able to bring their authentic self to work and really find sort of like a culture that helps them thrive. I will tell you that for a very long time, I actually hid who I was at work. I thought that it would impact my professional development. I thought that it would hold me back in my career path. Something like 68% of trans and non-binary folks are not fully out at work because of similar concerns or even concerns about their physical safety in the workplace. And so at some point in my career, later on sort of in this story, I realized that I didn't want to live having to like think about self-censure and think about like the sort of like cognitive load that comes along with hiding, such a fundamental part of your identity, and came out in at the time, fairly public sort of transition, and really started talking about, all the things that I was passionate about before, inclusive leadership and pay equity and all the things that I kind of picked up along my way, learning from, especially great HR leaders in these spaces, right? Working in this HR tech market and finding that I was really intellectually interested in the space. I was able to sort of like I guess, bring that more to the fore of my own practice, make it not just a story about, why this is good for business or why this is right for my team or why this is something that I believe, but really connect it back to, I think, my personal journey, which is somebody who wants to be seen and wants to be, recognized for who they are and wants to be, rewarded fairly for the work that they do and doesn't want their pronouns or the way that they look or, any of the other things about them to be something that people use as, maybe an excuse to hold you back.
And about how long ago was that announcement?
It was about 24, no, 2015. No, it's been a while. So you'll have to
about a decade.
Yeah. So the reason I'm struggling to answer your question is because I think I always knew that I was queer, and growing up, I had a language around like the way I feel is different than other people, and I attributed it to queerness because it was the language that I was exposed to. Around like 2015, 2016, I started to be exposed to more conversation about trans identity and about especially being non-binary. And I credit someone called Devin for really giving me a vocabulary for the way that I felt, which is different. And so I actually transitioned in my personal life earlier after that point, when I had some time to sit with it. And I started using they, them pronouns in my personal life. And then later at work, actually, sort of like just coming out of the pandemic, I went through this very public transition of officially sort of changing my pronouns at work. For a very long time, I sort of had the like they/she pronouns in my email signature. And folks who knew me well in the job that I was in at the time, I would talk to them about my identity and I would be open about it, but only to a point. I wouldn't correct people if they used she, her pronouns for me. Again, I wasn't super open with it because I really did think that it was going to sort of impact my own ability to advance in my career, especially in the environment I was working in at the time. But it was something that, I wanted to change. And so I think it was kind of like a journey. I would say identity in all facets is a journey, not a destination for most folks. So for me, that journey took a while between, getting sort of a language for how I felt and actually bringing it to bear in, everything all the way through to the workplace.
Do you feel that the real you was able to shine through even stronger and you were able to succeed even more and do more and almost have more brain power and creative juices because you didn't have something that you were kind of holding back or covering?
Yes. I think, the concept of covering or masking or social camouflage, or in some communities, it's called code switching. You have to do a lot of work to hide those fundamental aspects of yourself. And people ask me all the time, like, well, everybody's bringing, like their best self to work or like their work appropriate self to work, right? My sense of humor at work might be different than at home. And so, yes, of course, Sarah, I have the experience of, having to be a slightly different person. But when you have to be such a different person and you have to mind everything that you say, because you might accidentally let slip some detail about yourself that you are trying to hide. Queer folks have this experience and, they refer to their partners sort of in the abstract, or they don't even talk about their partners at work. They maybe pretend that they have a partner who's a different gender than the partner that they have, right? Non-binary people hide it in, accepting pronouns that don't fundamentally represent who they are, right? All of that comes with a load. And when you take that load off, it really does open up a different part of your brain that you are suddenly not worrying about what am I hiding versus what am I revealing to the world. You're worrying about, hey, I'm trying to solve this really interesting problem at work or in marketing or, in my personal life, or I'm able to devote myself more fully. I'm able to really engage more. I'm able to find more joy in everything that I do. I mean, I tell people all the time, like, never make a decision to come out based on anything other than like your emotional and physical safety and, like what you feel is right for you. I'm never going to tell you what to do. You make that decision for yourself. But also, as someone who went through that sort of transition, it's pretty joyous on the other side, at least for me. And it makes it all worth it, all the bad stuff worth it, when I meet people who say things to me like, you were the first trans or non-binary person I ever met. Or, I talked to my daughter about you, and later my daughter decided that they wanted to be my child, and, they've been on this beautiful growth path ever since, or, whatever it is.
And it's very clear to see that you've walked the walk, talked the talk, and again, mention it in the introduction in the bio, right? You are an executive running marketing at a global organization that's blowing up. Again, if you're looking for an HRIS, check out HiBob, reach out to Sarah and the team. Definitely worthwhile. But Sarah, let's talk a little bit about some of the future, right? What is coming whenever we think about the career map, right? We've talked some about the past. We've looked a little bit about the present, and we've gone through some of the first column of the positions into some of the skills. Any other education or certifications to add along the way? We've talked about that in some of our other conversations together, but hit on maybe some of those as you go towards some of the future steps.
Yeah, I don't know that I do a ton of formal education. I got my MBA not from going to an MBA program, but probably from just working in different business environments.
Managing by walking around, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I try and keep up. Obviously, marketing is a field that changes pretty dramatically. So whether it's like engaging in like new sort of research on like account-based marketing, or trying to keep up with like the marketing technology landscape that's always changing, trying to learn from, now I'm in a role where I'm kind of back to a generalist, just by notion of what a CMO does. I think I have 15 or 16 completely different functions within my own marketing organization. We're a team of like 85 people spread around the globe total. But, we cover so many different things. I can go to a conversation about, brand and brand marketing. And then I can go to a conversation about, accessibility on our website. And I can go to a conversation about SEO, and I can go to a conversation about analyst relations. And I can go to a conversation prepping for this beautiful podcast with you, Pete, right? So I think that, there's a really broad spread. And I think that the opportunity to continue to learn from the folks who are maybe not like a successor of yours, but who are like the deep functional experts in the things that now you manage is one of the like sort of incredible opportunities of my role, and the sort of like informal education that I get from working with all of these really genius people every day.
So whenever you're working with them, there's some of the reverse mentorship. You're sharing insights, perspectives, and experiences. They're asking questions. And I've talked with you and some of your team members over the last couple of weeks, couple of months, and you're good at this and you prioritize it. And I never know what time zone or continent you're in, but somehow you make time to invest in your people. How do you prioritize that? How do you squeeze those kinds of things in?
I think that like the higher up you get in an organization, the more your job becomes investing in people and prioritizing people. My husband sometimes jokes that it's also being a therapist for people. I think that's probably a little true. But I think that, I think of like maybe my own career path a bit like a martini glass shape. So you build a bit of a broad base as an early career person, because you get exposure to a couple different types of marketing, or a couple different types of like businesses that you're working in, or industries that you're moving across, right? And then at some point you find something that you really love and you specialize in it. For me, I specialize in product marketing, after working at salary.com, and really realizing that, I loved that sort of aspect of the business. I went from there to an industrial software company. So changed industries, but again, focused on product marketing. And then you kind of like, you end up in the top of the martini glass, right? You open back up, because suddenly as you advance, people are like, well, hey, can you manage this team? Hey, can you take on this responsibility? Yeah, I know you've never done one of my team members works in partner marketing. I've never worked in a formal partner marketing role myself, but it's my job to be the best leader and to give, those folks, even if they're working in, these places that maybe I'd never specialized in, the best advice, the best questions, right? It's all about investing in the time and the energy and making those people great. Because I could be the most genius, I don't know, copywriter in the world. I could be the most genius messaging expert in the world. I could be the most genius at managing a Google AdWords account in the world. I'm not any of those things. But if I was, it wouldn't matter, because that's not my job. My job is chief marketing officer. It's looking after the needs of this really broad organization. It's supporting HiBob's, global growth. It's thinking about inclusive leadership. It's, pushing us to do better every single day.
There's a lot that you've taught me over the past couple of months, and it's cool to see how you'll pull in certain individuals from your team if there's a question where you say, hey, I'm good at this, but they're really, really good at this. So let's make sure we get you the right answer. Sarah, we met a couple of months ago out in Vegas at a conference, and we've talked about the concepts and methodology from Pathfinders, Career Map, Personal Board of Advisors, got into the app a little bit as well. How has this framework methodology assisted you, and where's the value that you see in this approach to professional development?
I think that I wish somebody had explained this concept to me much younger than my 21 plus years of age, because I think that all of us sort of collect some of these folks or some of these personalities on your personal board of advisors map informally as you grow and change. There's always folks that you sort of keep in your network, or you text from time to time, or you ask advice of, right? But thinking about building it out a little bit more formally, or thinking about even just the roles that those folks play, and am I heavily weighted in professional functional mentorship versus am I missing somebody who's a champion or a cross-functional mentor, or
accountability buddy. You gotta say it out loud. Accountability buddy.
Pete's been trying to teach me to pronounce this word, accountability, and I finally got it right. But I think, it's been something that I think I've bumped into kind of some of these concepts along the way. I'll give you an example. As somebody who is non-binary and doesn't always get invited to every discussion as you grow up in your career, right? You want to have someone who's an ally, who maybe even looks different than you look, who gets invited to conversations that you don't. And that person could be somebody in a different department than you. It could be like me, that you're looking for somebody who is invited to a discussion of the old boys club that maybe you don't get invited to, or somebody who can, who's at a different level than you in the organization, who can volunteer you when somebody is looking for a strategic thought partner or a project lead, or, whatever it is, right? But I've talked for a very long time, in working with folks who identify as women, or who identify as queer, in how to navigate the workplace, especially in things like tech that is, it tends to be sort of male dominated in its environment. And so I'd sort of formulated this concept of you want an ally, right? But I had never thought about okay, well, who's my ally, and do I have the right ones, and are they the right makeup, and how do they complement an ally versus a sponsor? How does a sponsor complement a coach? How do these folks really work together to give you sort of a holistic picture or holistic board that you can actually go and ask questions to?
100%, a little bit of structure, a little bit of process, a little bit of rigor. Sarah, we're going to get into the quick fire questions here, and then wrap up with a few conclusion points. Are you ready for the quick fire questions?
Sure.
Book that you recommend most and or read most?
I think the book that I reference most, I'll give you sort of the boring business context first, is probably Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. I was out with a friend last night in London walking their dog, and we were talking about, everything from the HR tech industry to, what their family looks like, and, how they're doing, and how's everything going. And we were talking about crossing the chasm again. Jeffrey Moore has this sort of very interesting concept about, how products get adopted, and, what happens between sort of the early adopters who are willing to buy into technology and willing to try new things, and sort of Main Street of, everybody who wants to see it proven out. He calls it the chasm between those two groups. And he talks about sort of business strategies for moving across that, and what happens when you move across that, and how companies and teams and stuff like that need to change. So I think that is great. In my free time, I read a lot of, smutty romance novels. So I won't necessarily recommend those to your readers, although I do heavily recommend, don't just always immerse yourself in, business books. Think about how you expand, your thought process out to, fiction, nonfiction. Pick up a history book, friends. Learn about the history of the places that you're visiting, or the country that you live in, or why our political system looks the way that it does. There's so many different topics that you could potentially engage on. So I would say, think about what you what you love and what you're curious about. And, I won't recommend one book to you in particular, but I'd leave you with the idea that like, hey, it's worthwhile to spend your time reading some of that stuff too.
Thank you very much. Sarah, as we wrap up here, can everybody find you on LinkedIn to learn more about your work, where you're at, what's happening next, and the cool products that you're marketing?
Yeah, if you'd love to say hi to Bob, you can find us at hibob.com. If you want to say hi to me, you can find me on LinkedIn/Sarah Liz Reynolds, or you can find me shouting into the void on the artist formerly known as Twitter at FairPayMonster.
There we go. Or at a myriad of HR tech conferences around the world.
Yes.
Please follow on LinkedIn. Sarah, I'm going to do a quick 30-second wrap up here, and it'll just kind of pull out some of the themes that seem to really resonate with me. Knowing that this 21 plus year adventure started with you wanting to be a marine biologist, surrounded initially by STEM professionals, and that history and arts degree transitioned to culinary school from the basement. The private chef work wasn't entirely for you, and the accidental stumble into tech administration and then into BD with edtech helped you really understand and bring to light that what we've done doesn't determine who we can be and what we can do and where we can go. So as you figured out the marketing at that 10-person company when you were voluntold almost once again, you sort of laid the groundwork for some of that OG talent mobility. Marketing was like a puzzle with the art and science for you, and you were able to get more into the demand gen aspect of marketing for HR tech, working at Legacy UKG, getting into the restart-up of salary.com, and finding a love inside of product marketing. You were being true to yourself about a decade ago and really unlocked the full you and your identity. So thank you for that. And now you're with a global team of 85 plus people just in marketing with HiBob, doing more than a dozen different functions, always growing and learning while polishing those therapist skills. And I think many people are grateful of that as you continue on this martini glass journey. It's cool to hear that you thought that the concept of a career map and the personal board of advisors would have been valuable to you earlier on. So cheers to you, Sarah, as you continue crossing the chasm together. And thanks for sharing your story of culinary dropout to now cooking up magical marketing that actually works and helps change organizations.
Pete, do you want to be my radio announcer and just follow me around? That was fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thanks for today, Sarah. And
thank you so much.
Look forward to sharing more and hearing more along the way.
Yeah, see you at our next conference together.